On today's show, you may have heard some reports and rumors that Juan Soto is definitely going to be traded. If you listen to Ken Rosenthal, well, I'm being joined by a special guest to discuss some of the possible landing destinations for him if he is in fact traded. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Padres, your daily San Diego Padres podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Padres podcast, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day for Wednesday, November 29th. As always, I'm your host with sometimes occasionally, but I promise you, not always the most, Javier Reyes. Follow me on Twitter at Javipeno, Javiipeno, or at @LO_Padres if you don't like my crap posting. That's for baseball stuff only. Locked On Padres on YouTube as well if you want to say hi to Pac-Man and Tatis, or if you want to see a very legendary figure who is on the show today. He is a writer for many places. He's written for Forbes, which is a great party trick, as we talked about before started recording. He's written for Baseball Prospectus. He's written for places I've written before that don't exist anymore, Off the Bench Baseball, etc. Is Mr. Daniel R. Epstein. Sir, how are you doing?
I am doing great. I am not Ken Rosenthal. Sorry. I mean, that would have been a really good guest. You should have got that guy. Yeah. Instead, you got me.
Well, in fairness, he is a little bit of a controversial figure, dare I say, in the Padres fandom after the Max Scherzer incident.
Yeah, well, it's a little controversial in a lot of places, but he also, his contacts in his phone are way more impressive than mine. But mine has Javi Reyes. So
yeah, that's
he doesn't have that.
That's right. That's absolutely right. We're going to be talking about the possible destinations for Juan Soto because that is what has been reported. People, by the time you're listening to this, it will have been yesterday. That's not a question of if he's traded; it's a question of where. Basically, to quickly summarize Ken's thoughts on the matter, we're going to be talking about it today, guys. Before we get into that, though, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. Just make sure not to bet on the Chargers. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Sir, all right, so look, I think you've actually been on the show once. I forgot when the heck it was. It was a really long time ago.
A while ago.
It's been a while. We've both been super busy. You've been busy, I imagine, recovering from the Yankees' disaster, from getting lambasted in the media lately, something I am very much enjoying because I think it's hilarious that Brian Cashman has decided to go scorched earth on everything. But I guess it's a decent enough segue. You wrote an article for Forbes that everybody could go check out. I'll link it in the description of this show. And he writes all sorts of stuff. You guys should go check him out on Twitter at @DEpstein1983. And one of the teams, and we're going to talk about them quickly, that has been rumored is the Yankees. Now, personally, I don't think that it's impossible. I would not be super super The Yankees certainly have the capital. They have always had the money, but I am reticent to believe that they care. For lack of a better term, I feel like the past few years they've become the Boston Celtics. For those who don't follow the NBA, that was a team that had all the assets, all the draft picks, and a good team, but they never seemed to care about making the move that would put them over the top. And while they have re-signed Judge, they did sign Carlos Rodon, they haven't had that it factor lately, being like, you know what, screw all of you. We're going to go get the best players available because we're the Yankees. Instead, that seems to have become the Mets. But what do you think? Do you agree with that? And do you think that the Yankees should be one of the favorites overall to land Juan Soto?
Well, I'll start with the second part of that question. Yes, I think they should be one of the favorites overall because if you look at the Yankees' needs, without going too deep into it, they need a left-handed hitter, they need people who can get on base, and they need outfielders. So no one checks those boxes the same way that Juan Soto does. He's just the perfect fit for what they need. But are they still the team that just goes out and spends and goes and gets? Yes and no. but they're not spending the right way. Like
Yeah.
they're not good at it anymore. And really the Yankees are far more valuable than any other franchise. They bring in more money than any other franchise, presumably. They should have more money to spend than just about any franchise. And their superpower, if they choose to use it, is that they can take on bad contracts or players who are good now who will become bad, like they did with Giancarlo Stanton a few years ago, obviously, knowing the back end of those deals are going to be bad, and then move on from them when it turns sour. And they just don't do that. Like they didn't stick the landing with the back half of that. So when you look at Stanton, it's not that the money is the issue, the roster spot is the issue. The fact that he's going to take up 400, 500 plate appearances is the issue. And that's the resource that is most precious. But they're not going to move on from him. And, hey, maybe he goes out and he hits, 50 home runs next year. I don't know. But they don't move on from those sunk costs the way that they should. So now they've accumulated many of them. Yeah. And the real issue is that they're going to dedicate 2,000 plate appearances to guys who really shouldn't be on a championship caliber roster at all.
Yeah.
So they can afford to just say, okay, we got the money, let's cut them and get someone else. But they just don't do that. And I get financially why they don't, but they're wasting their most precious resource, which is more money than everyone else.
Yeah. It's incredible how they're in that position. Meanwhile, Steve Cohen's like, all right, yeah, sure, I'll pay Scherzer $48 million next year. Let's just fix it and whatnot. It's really incredible how that's kind of shaken up. But guys, we're going to save the Yankee talk. And frankly, because I imagine a lot of people just don't want to hear only Yankees talk. Frankly, I think they're a very over-discussed team. Tomorrow, I'll be talking with Stacey Gatsoulis and Steve Granado of Locked On Yankees to dive deeper, maybe do some mock trades, talk about some prospects. Maybe that Jason Dominguez fellow will be involved in such a trade. Probably makes the most sense.
I've heard of him.
Yeah. He's fun. The Martian. Love him. By the way, great movie. I saw it again last night on cable. Just, better than Interstellar, as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, next team that you mentioned as a possibility, I think makes a lot of sense. And I think a lot of people have been following this team for a while. And when you consider some of the moves they have made with, Seiya Suzuki, the Chicago Cubs, that has been a team that has really, I think, quietly rebuilt decent enough. This is a team that had a genuine fire sale just a couple years ago. And then they come into last year, they take a flyer on Cody Bellinger, who's now probably the second best free agent available overall on the market, which is wild by most estimations. What do you think makes the Cubs a potential destination the most?
Well, I mean, you can do the roster math. You subtract one Bellinger, you can replace him by adding one Juan Soto. Bellinger is the best outfield free agent available, and they stand to lose him. I mean, maybe they re-sign Bellinger. They're certainly probably in the running to do that. We'll see if they actually do. It's still early, but they got to replace that big lefty bat in the lineup. He's not as clean of a fit defensively for the Cubs because they have a couple of corner outfielders. They've got, say, a Suzuki. They've got Ian Happ. Happ theoretically could move back to center. He won a Gold Glove in left last year, but they probably want to leave him there. Soto essentially is on a 1-year deal. He's got 1 year left. If they traded him there, then he'd probably be the DH for the Cubs, or at least kind of rotate with Suzuki for right field and DH. Whatever, you can make that work. They got a little bit of a mess there with guys like Christopher Morel, and how does that all shake out? But first of all, it's possible that some of those guys end up going back to the Padres in a deal. Maybe like Matt Mervis, becomes goes to the Padres or something, and Morel plays first base like they talked about. I don't know. Or maybe there would be a subsequent trade where they ship out Happ for somebody else. There's any number of ways they could do it. You don't if you can get Juan Soto, you don't say, well, we've already got 2 corner outfielders, so we'll pass. No, you just go get Juan Soto and you figure things out later.
The Padres did. Yeah.
Exactly.
The problem with the Padres is they didn't figure it out later. That's the problem with them.
not.
They
They
didn't
did not.
seem to plan ahead. They paid everyone but him.
Yeah, but
Um,
the thing with the Cubs, they are on the upswing. They were
yeah.
83 and 79 last year, which was actually better than either the Padres or the Yankees by a game.
Mhm,
The Diamondbacks went to the World Series. They were 84 and 78.
mhm.
They were only a game out of the playoffs, Chicago. So they climbed a little bit faster than people thought that they would. Plus, they added an extra postseason team last year. They expanded
Yeah.
the playoffs. So they are a team that absolutely should be adding. They've got some young talent. They've got some dudes, and they can make some moves to try to get back there. And Soto would be a great centerpiece that would probably put them back in the playoffs in a relatively weak division.
Yeah. And it must be tough now. I think the Cubs are a little bit exception. They suffered for literally 100 years, but it must be annoying if you're like a White Sox fan or Rockies or A's or some of these like teams that have been the Tigers who have been rebuilding for so long, and it took apparently the Cubs just 2 seconds. I think that they're a fascinating team. They had a genuine Cy Young contender. They just kind of fell off at the end, and I think that some really underrated players, guys like Nico Horner. I would argue everyone on their team, frankly, is pretty underrated, with Nico Horner, with Dansby Swanson, Ian Happ, like you mentioned, like
Mhm.
some pretty underrated players. And then if you add someone like I think it could be big. Plus, they've got some interesting prospects, some of which they got from the big fire sale that they had. Pete Crow Armstrong, famously
yeah.
in the Javi Baez trade. He's an outfielder, AAA right now, could be a dude that could, obviously he will not replace Juan Soto in the literal like wins above replacement value sense. But if you're wanting to get someone back, you're wanting to shed some payroll, Picaro Armstrong, and then like some random reliever, maybe, and then throwing a couple other whatever pieces. That's not the worst in the world. I think Padres need to remember that he is only 1 year away from free agency. He doesn't have the same value as 2.5 years they did
He
before. So
is. It's not. It's a really hard thing to predict. Like
yeah,
I just as a matter of course try not to predict like, oh, they're going to trade this guy and this guy for this guy, because you
yeah,
just never know. But
you definitely
I
don't.
I think it's especially difficult here because Soto is only on a 1 year deal. He's only got 1 year remaining.
Mhm.
The Padres are over a barrel financially by the things that they have admitted. They haven't really done a great job of hiding their financial
Nope,
situation at all. So they
nope,
haven't put themselves in great negotiating leverage there. And, but on the other side of it, he is Juan Soto. He
yeah,
has had a 401 on base percentage or better in every single year of his career, and he's like 25.
mhm,
So
yeah,
there's no one else like him. But so those things kind of counter balance each other a little bit. I'm sure they'll get some prospects, but then again, maybe if the Padres make a deal where the team that gets Soto also takes Cronenworth and his unwanted contract,
yes,
then they don't give as much prospect
mhm,
compensation in return. So
yeah.
some of that could be a factor as well.
Yeah, Cronenworth is definitely a name, I think, for Padres fans to keep an eye on because, do they attach a prospect with him? Do they attach him with the Soda thing, like you were just kind of mentioning?
Sure.
That's a big part of this too.
Or Matt
Personally,
Carpenter too. Carpenter I think is owed $5.5 million.
yeah,
And speaking of guys who just shouldn't really be taking up plate appearances on a major league team anymore,
and former
Carpenter's in
Yankee,
that conversation,
and former
and the
Yankee too,
Padres
so it
would.
fits.
Yeah, exactly. He was actually good for the Yankees,
Yeah, must
and
have been
cheap
nice.
for the Yankees.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Personally, just based on again, we mentioned we don't know what the heck the deal would be. I like the Cubs because of them having a lot of what the Padres need, and I really like their prospects. I think Pete Crow Armstrong could be a stud, and that could be viewed as, in my opinion, a reverse of when, let's say, when the Yankees traded Aroldis Chapman for
Hmm.
Gleyber Torres. It's a 1 year guy, and they knew they weren't competitive. They wanted to get rid of him. Yeah, it wasn't like a boatload package, but you get that one guy that can make a lot of difference. So that's a team that I personally think is the most exciting trade partner out of the bunch that we mentioned. But there's still more. We got to talk about more guys. But before we get into that, got to take a quick second to talk about who I talked about at the top of the podcast right now, ladies and gentlemen. FanDuel, you've heard of them. You've heard the dueling fans before. You've heard the Duel of Fates. You've also heard the dueling fans. All right, that's a little Star Wars reference for you guys. But right now, new customers over at FanDuel, they get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. money line bet, I should say. That's $150 if your team wins. I highly recommend not betting on the Chargers. I highly recommend not betting apparently on the Carolina Panthers, although honestly, I'm a big believer in the post-coach firing thing. So that's apparently been happening this year with the Raiders, and then the Steelers getting rid of their offense coordinator. So just some my personal tips. But everybody, if you don't want to do the money line stuff, don't worry. They've got you for spreads, player props, over-unders, a whole bunch more. If you want to have over-under drops by Kansas City receivers, I bet you can do that too. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. And everybody, we are back here, Locked On Padres. We're killing it. Daniel R. Epstein, he's been spitting facts, spitting wisdom, the same way he's... what do you do for your music group? Are you playing guitar or drums?
I play drums.
Okay, drums.
I felt like saying just literally spitting.
Yeah. I spit for them every time someone is in the crowd. Yeah, that's a whole thing. But guys, here's the thing: we're not done yet. We've talked about the Yankees and the Cubs. Let's get into the next team that I find to be a fascinating team. You know why? Because I swear on God's green earth, I did not hear a single thing about this team. It has been a conspiracy theory for me all year. I feel like I heard nothing. I don't know how to explain it, but the Toronto Blue Jays. A team that I think has been slightly overrated these past few years. I think that they have a lot of fun players in theory, and they have a player who, might be one of the most overrated players in baseball just based on his value in terms of what he's put out on the field in Vladimir Guerrero Jr. What do you think makes the Blue Jays an interesting spot?
What's interesting for the Blue Jays is that every year in March, people think they're going to win like 98 games and win the division. And everyone thinks the Rays are going to win like 85 games and finish in third place. And then by the end of the year, those two have switched places every single year.
Insane.
But what's up with the Blue Jays? They were 89-73 last year. They were in the playoffs, obviously. And that's a good thing for them. That's where they want to be. They haven't had a lot of playoff success since winning those 2 World Series in the early 90s. But they also are desperate for an outfielder. They need a middle of the order left-handed bat. 2 of the big free agents that they stand to lose include Brandon Belt, who had a really good year for them batting from the left side, and Kevin Kiermaier, who plays center field. Unlike the Cubs with Ian Happ, they can just shift their left fielder, Dalton Varsho, over to center and, plug Soto into left. So he is a good fit there for their lineup, I think. They're like an up-and-coming team. They've got all these young players, like everyone who was the son of some other player that I watched growing up who turned out to be great. And they return most of their pitching, unlike the Padres. And they just have to kind of retool their lineup around, Bichette and Guerrero and, those dudes. So they have to rebuild maybe 3 or 4 spots in the batting order. And Juan Soto goes a long way in doing that in the most competitive division in baseball. So I think that he plugs in really well there. I'm not sure where they are financially, whether they would want to take that on, or if they would even want to be the kind of team that takes on Cronenworth, because they could use upgrades at second base and third base as well. You could argue whether or not Cronenworth is an upgrade at either of those positions, but he is a guy, and he bats left-handed, and he plays all 4 infield positions ostensibly. So, they might be less willing to take on a contract that runs through 2030 that hasn't even kicked in yet. But that could be an offset, if they're willing to go in that direction. So it just seems roster-wise that Soto could make a lot of sense for Toronto as a team that is trying to improve their fortunes in the regular season and in the postseason.
Yeah, absolutely. And they've been, like, I was mean to them at the beginning. They've still been good. It's just that, like you said, they're projected to win like 98 every single year. Vladdy, maybe he bounces back next year. But I think that also this team, they need to like get off the mat. They got a little bit, kind of got their butts kicked with that Dalton Varsho trade. Doesn't seem to have panned out for them. I believe they gave up Gabriel Barreto, who was like a superstar of the postseason. That wasn't great. And they also, I believe, had Lourdes Gurriel Jr.
Yeah, it was Gurriel and Gabriel Moreno for Dalton Varsho, and Varsho just did not hit at all.
Yeah.
And even his defense kind of went downhill, and he's a really great defensive outfielder normally.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe they can rebuild him and get him back to what he had been in Arizona. Or maybe not. Who knows? But he's there. So,
yeah,
that's happening.
He is confirmed there. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that Cronenworth, I know that this is, if I'm a team, look, if you're an opposing fan base, you're like probably have already had Padres fans in your life being like, we'll give you Cronenworth. Like, does he become the new Miguel Andujar, Clint Frazier, but for the Padres, where it's like he's involved in every mock trade? I will say it is troubling that he's gotten worse every year. If you're a fan, talk yourself into the fact that the Padres, just the past few years, when it comes to batters, no one has gotten better. They either stay the same or get worse, except for weirdly Gary Sanchez, which is only adds to his legend, by the way. I love Gary Sanchez so much. But yeah, Cronenworth, can he become that kind of infielder utility guy? They couldn't quite get that out of Biggio, and Whit Merrifield and stuff like that maybe weren't their prime guys. So I wouldn't be super
just did weird stuff with him.
I know.
They were like, let's take this slap hitting, singles hitting, speed and defense middle infielder and make him our starting first baseman.
It's like,
what? And then give him a 7-year extension.
See that I just I don't want to get into it today, but like, who were you betting against? Yeah. Who were you bidding against? I just and
he's
and
a nice
what I've
player,
heard,
like even
I think if it's 5 years, a lot more teams are like, yeah, we can revitalize this guy. He was awesome at one point, and he's a utility infielder, and he's a really good defensive infielder too. So, but like 7, that's like, and like you said, it's not even kicked in yet. I just don't know. Like, I remember waking up. It happened like before opening day, and I was like, "What? I already put out my episode today. I don't even know what to say on this. Like, I don't even know what to say." So that could be an interesting team that I think would make sense for someone like Cronenworth, unlike, say, the Cubs that we were talking about before, where I don't really know exactly if they'd have room, but who knows? Next team. Let's move on. The team that thought they had it all. They made the postseason for the first time in forever. Their fans are like, hey, you over there, I'm going to lecture you about what it takes to make the postseason. That is the Seattle Mariners. Of course, I'm joking. Shout out Colby and Ty Dane Gonzalez over at Locked On Mariners. Mariners, really easy team to love. They've had some weird moments, and, Jerry Dipoto famously on his hospital bed trying to make moves or whatever. I don't know. I hope he's okay now, but I'm curious, like, is this the type of team that's like due for a splash of any sorts? And they do have a recent trade history with the Padres. It didn't work out for the Padres with Ty France and Andres Muniz going over for a guy that was recently, I believe, non-tendered by the Padres. So I'm going to leave it at that. I don't even want to say his name. What do you think makes the Mariners interesting in this case that could be a match for Soto?
Well, just because the Mariners, much like the Padres, are just always a wild card team in trades. Not wild card team in the playoffs, obviously.
Yeah.
But, wild card when it comes to the offseason where you don't know what they're going to do. They could be in on any trade. They're like probably the 2 most active trading teams. So it's just always a possibility. But you look at some of their stated goals. They said that they needed to get guys who make more contact, who strike out less. They traded Eugenio Suarez to Arizona, who, struck out like a million times.
Yeah.
Their big free agent that's walking away is Teoscar Hernandez, who also struck out a million times. The 2 of them combined for 425 strikeouts last year. Just those 2 players. They can hit a lot of home runs, both of them, for sure. But, their on-base percentages were both like a little above 300, I think, because they just strike out so much. So they're just boomer bust hitters, and Seattle has moved on from both of them. They've moved on from paying both of them. Now, if you look at what the 2 of them made last year and add that up, that does not come up to what Juan Soto would make. But it is possible to look at the Suarez trade, which was a little unexpected, especially that early in the offseason, and say, maybe they were trying to clear some payroll. I think he was owed $13 million. They're trying to clear the books to pave the runway for a bigger move, such as Juan Soto. Wouldn't surprise me. Wouldn't totally be out of left field, pun intended. Actually, he'd probably play right field for them because that's what Teoscar Hernandez played. So they've got a hole there in their outfield. And they may have just made room in their budget for at least, I'll say 45% of a Juan Soto salary.
Yeah. I think my only hold up with the Mariners is I don't quite know if the return would make sense for the Padres. They wouldn't be a team that probably want to take on Cronenworth. And their top prospects, based on what I've just seen, I'm not an expert or anything like that. Shortstop, catcher, with Colt Emerson as one of them. Obviously some of them got promoted. I remember back in the day when Emerson Hancock was a big prospect for them. That doesn't seem to be the case anymore. I see the match for the Mariners. I don't know if I quite see it for the Padres, just because now, granted, I don't know what the heck the Padres are doing. Like, I don't know, like, what is their route. Are they going to try and go for it right now? That's what I thought earlier when it was like, oh, maybe they trade for Corbin Burns and they say, screw all of you. We're going for it again this year. That wouldn't have surprised me at all, if they were like, no, we don't care. You think we're scared? We're not backing down. That's what AJ Preller has done.
The Padres have a significant problem, which is that according to the rules of baseball, somebody has to pitch at all times, and they don't have anyone who can do that. So
I disagree.
Well, they have some, but not many. Okay, hold on. I've got roster resource up right now. I'm going to quiz you. Can you name... Now, the top two starters are Musgrove and Darvish. Sure.
Right.
Good. No problem. Awesome. Can you name the listed number 3 starter?
Is it Michael Waldron?
Sort of. It's Matt Waldron.
All right. So this is the Marvel nerd in me. Michael Waldron is the name of the guy who wrote Loki. I'm a long-time listener to the pod. Wow. I make this mistake every single time. I do this every time. It's incredible.
Well, I'm not going to quiz you on their 4th and 5th starters. That's Pedro Avila and Jay Groom.
Right.
So, Jay Groom, come on. What is this, like 2016? So they don't have starters.
Right.
They stand to lose this offseason. They stand to lose. Obviously, Snell won the Cy Young Award. Josh Hader, probably the best relief pitcher, one of the top 3 relief pitchers year by year in the sport. Yeah. Lugo was good for them. Michael Wacha was good for them. Nick Martinez, valuable swingman. Those 5 dudes right there threw 627 in the 3rd innings and had 14 WAR, baseball reference version. You can't just replace them for no money.
Yeah.
So if they want to be good and they want to cut $50 million from payroll, they're going to need to get some pitchers back if they trade Juan Soto.
Yeah.
And you're right about that. Like maybe there are pitchers that the Mariners can expel in a Soto trade, but
they do have a lot of pitching.
I'm not sure. Yeah.
That is one area where they fit. If in terms of not prospects, but in terms of the pitching, I mean, they have a ton. They've got and I think they'll have Robbie Ray coming back next year, I think, at some point. So that's like at least an arm, even if he can be a little bit lit up, especially by the Astros sometimes, and brought in to face Yordan Alvarez in questionable situations. Other than that, like, you've got Kirby, you've got, was it Mason Miller, I believe. I'm blanking on names for the rest of their rotation, but
there was like 3 dudes named Miller who came up and throw 102 miles an hour. There's Bobby, there's Mason, and then there's, I can't remember the other guy. There's one on the Dodgers, one on the Mariners, one on Oakland. And don't
Gilbert,
ask me
Castillo,
which one of them their first
Bryce Miller. Bryce Miller is who it is.
Bryce Miller. Okay. Yeah. I think
a lot of pitching. A lot of pitching. So I could see a world that part of it makes sense. In terms of prospects, I don't see it. I don't think they get any offense. They can't put Cronenworth there. Should be interesting, though. And like you said, now personally, I'm not as down because I think they retain. I think they will bring back, especially with the rumors of Soto being traded. I think they can bring back one of Lugo or Wacha. Then I like their prospects with Snelling and Lesko potentially being the 5. I'm not thrilled with it. I just don't think they're at DEFCON 4 needing a pitcher. They're more like 2.5. You know what I mean? But they can get to 3 quick depending on what is the health situation with Darvish, I think is where it goes up. But for now, I'm just going to assume that he'll be back for opening day. Let's move to the next team. We talked a lot about the Mariners, but now we got to talk about a division rival. And thankfully, for the love of Pete, it's finally not the Dodgers that are rumored to get some amazing player. It is the San Francisco Giants. this is a team I've been talking about all year. I think that they are the ultimate wild card team this offseason because they whiffed last offseason. And what I mean, I'm not saying it was like bad that they didn't get these players necessarily, but they clearly wanted them in Carlos Correa and Aaron Judge of your New York Yankees. So taking all that into account, they don't have the best farm in the world. They got a lot of old players. I think they're in for everyone. Ohtani. Heck, they could bring someone out of retirement for all I care. Bartolo Colon might pitch for them next year. They just need stuff. So what do you think about the San Francisco Giants prospects?
Well, as strange as it would seem, I think that Soto would be their plan B. Their plan A is Bellinger because they really need a center fielder.
Yeah.
That's the big thing for them. But I think that if they lose out on Bellinger, then they could pivot to Soto. Now, the issue with that is that I would say more likely than not that Soto is traded before Bellinger signs. Anything could happen with the winter meetings, but I think the Padres are more motivated to move Soto a little quicker. I don't know what Bellinger's timeline is, but let's say the Padres aren't getting Bellinger either. But let's say the Giants miss out on Bellinger. Yeah. They could say, all right, well, let's try and see if we can get Soto. They're in a similar situation to the Cubs where they already have a lot of guys that fill that kind of role. They've got a lot of people in the corner outfield, first base, DH mix, especially left-handed hitters. Michael Conforto, Lamont Wade Jr., Mike Yastrzemski.
My guy, yeah.
But none of those dudes make it that like you can't get Soto. Because he's Juan Soto. You don't say, well, Mike Yastrzemski is standing in Juan Soto's way. No. You just don't. You just trade Mike Yastrzemski somewhere. You do something with. You bench him if you have to, but you go get Juan Soto if you can go get Juan Soto. They would still need a center fielder though. So Juan Soto could not be their only big move of the offseason if they were to do it. But I could definitely see them pivoting in that direction if they don't get Bellinger.
I think that I'm similar to the Mariners, although even more so. I think that this team doesn't have quite what the Padres would be looking for, unless it's like a true salary dump trade. Now, I don't think that's what it'll be, but we'll see. It would be interesting. And frankly, I think that they're also a team to look out for Ohtani. They've been reported a team to look out for Blake Snell. So I think that the Giants, they like these big power hitters, don't they? They find a way to get one of them. Somehow, every generation, man, like they find a way to get one of these super studs on their team. They will have a star player. They refuse to not have one of the most iconic, like top 5 players of the sport. It's just not in their nature. So, but I also agree with you. I think that Bellinger's probably their number one guy that they're looking at. I imagine he's a lot of teams' number one guys because it's a pretty shallow free agent class outside like the top tier talent. So I could see that absolutely. And
if you need a center fielder and you don't get Bellinger, who's the next best center fielder available? Probably Kevin Kiermaier.
Probably, right?
That's not that exciting.
No, it is not. No, it is not. Oh my God. I forgot about that. Oh, gee. This is a real this free agent class gets dark like quick.
It does. I mean, there are obviously some big names at the top. I mean, Ohtani, of course, but once you get past the first 5, and some of the Japanese pitchers coming over are amazing, but once you get past the first 5, 6, top free agents, then you're really scraping the bottom of the barrel for anyone who can be a starter in any way.
Yeah, and then you've got Jung-Ho Lee potentially. Maybe that's a guy. I talked about him as like the best case scenario free agent that the Padres could go after on my podcast. Again, best case scenario. And I would love that. That would be cool. I like guys who don't swing and miss. But then it's like after Hoskins, it's like, oh my God, Clevenger's right there, right? Then it goes Lugo, Jorge Soler. You know what I mean? It gets really dark especially when it comes to offense. But sir, those are the main 5 teams. Who do you think are some mystery, sort of under the radar teams that you think people should have an eye on?
Well, whenever you're talking about someone who makes a lot of money, by default, you have to talk about the Mets.
Yeah.
Like the Mets just like guys who earn a lot of money. And if they're good, then great. And if not, then they'll just trade them to the Astros or something for pennies on the dollar. And then they'll be great in the playoffs because that's just the way that baseball works now. So you figure that they're a team, they were under 500 last year. I think they won 75 games with all the money that they spend on all those great dudes. They obviously need to revamp their lineup. And you could see them saying money is no object. Take our prospects and we will take your Juan Soto for you. And we'll take your Jake Cronenworth for you. And we'll just here's a lot of money. You need money and we have it. So here, have some.
The Cronenworth factor, I think, fits this team the best. That team would absolutely be like, yeah, sure, why not? We'll get a utility guy. They've been weird with infielders. I think they have a new person playing third every 6 months for that team. Very weird. So I just don't know. But obviously, they're totally set with Lindor, probably their best player. You still got Nimmo, you got Alonso. So I think in general, the Mets are a weird, I'm not buying it. I'm not buying that they're 100% rebuilding. I just don't think when you look at the history of sports, new owners with big pockets, when have they ever been able to stand back? You just saw the damn Carolina Panthers owner fire his sixth coach in 3 years or whatever the heck it was, right? And make them draft the quarterback that the coaching staff didn't want. I just think that it's hard for them not to make splashes. Phoenix Suns with Kevin Durant this past season, right? I'm just not buying that my guy. And also, I personally think that Ohtani is another one. I think that dude was watching the World Baseball Classic, stroking his mustache like a supervillain. Oh my God, imagine if I had that here. You suck it, New York. I'll start. So I absolutely think the Mets could work. Are there any other teams?
Yeah, another team I'm going to throw out there, probably not going to like this, is the Atlanta Braves.
Oh.
Could you imagine Soto in that lineup?
That's what we just need to fold the sport. That's what we need
they
to fold.
set the record of 307 home runs, but the one position on their team that was not all-star caliber was left field. And all of those guys are signed for way below market contracts. So theoretically, they got the money. They got plenty of money pouring in from the whatever district they call it. They built up, 1,000 square miles around the ballpark for just, expensive, not that great restaurants or something. I don't know. But they got all sorts of money pouring in from that. Meanwhile, they're shutting down the libraries in Cobb County. But anyway, so I could easily see them saying, we got all this money. Let's get Juan Soto to bat leadoff in front of Ronald Acuna Jr. and Matt Olson and Austin Riley.
Yeah. Makes sense. Tragic to say. I'm going to assume, based off of the amount of heists this team has pulled off over the past few years, Sean Murphy is the first one that comes to mind. Matt Olson, obviously, that they have stuff. I don't even know if it's prospects, but they'll have stuff somehow.
It's a good
shout out
Oakland
to the
doesn't
Oakland
have
A's.
Any more good players.
Yeah, it's shouts to the Oakland A's, really illustrating what the problem is with baseball sometimes. But the Braves, I absolutely see it. I think it would make a lot of sense for them. I'm sure this will be another player who will contribute to them going really far yet again in a very good division. We'll have to wait and see if the fan base starts crying again in the middle of the postseason, but that'll be irrespective of Juan Soto. I'm sure that he'd be a great fit there. And it would just be sick. Frankly, it would just be sick. Even as an outsider,
fun to watch.
Yeah.
Even not liking Atlanta, just saying how many runs can one team possibly score?
Absolutely.
I'll give you one more team. That is a maybe.
One more.
The Los Angeles Angels.
Oh, thank God you didn't say Dodgers.
Did not say Dodgers, but they're going to lose Ohtani.
Yeah.
They got to sell tickets somehow. What is the direction of that franchise?
They're the crazy irrational team out of everyone we've made. They probably shouldn't, but you're right. I see the owner being like, "Oh my God, we're losing Ohtani. Go trade for Soto, and yeah, we'll take Cronenworth too." And then the Padres, they get blessed. You know what I mean? They're like, "Oh, great! We get it. Sure, this is amazing." I mean,
Mike Trout plays 110 games a year these days. You know, and they're fantastic. They're peak level Trout, but only for about 2/3 of the season. And he's just not super young anymore, as sorry as I am to say all that. So where do they go? They've got a million bad contracts. They probably even have more than the Yankees do. So I'm not sure what direction the Angels take this offseason, but you can't replace Ohtani. He's the most singular player in baseball history. There's never been anyone like him. There is no replacement for him. But the best that you could probably do is someone like Juan Soto, who is a singular hitter.
Yeah.
And you can
Let's
put him
ignore all
out
the
there
other
and
things
see what
about
you
his
do.
game. Ignore everything else. I mean, it does speak though how good he is at hitting that you can kind of ignore that he can't really defend and he's a weird base runner that makes dumb errors all the time. But kind of doesn't matter. That's how good this guy is.
You're gonna have a 410 on base and hit 35 home runs.
Yeah.
You can do whatever you want in the outfield.
You could be
You
I-5ing
can
the
pick
fans.
daisies. It's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. Him and Acuna both just completely neglecting defense. And they're just like, whatever. Like, it doesn't matter. We'll just make up for it at the plate. What a life. Man, I wish I was good at sports. Sir, this was a lot of fun. Again, just to go through the teams really quickly. You mentioned the Angels, the Mets, and then also you have the Cubs, you have the Giants, you have the New York Yankees, much to my chagrin. You have many others. I'm going to link the article in the description of this podcast, wherever you find it, YouTube, whatever. But last but not least, sir, do you have anything you'd like to plug for the good people out there?
Well, I am the proud co-director of the Internet Baseball Writers Association of America. So you can check us out at IBWAA. Javi Reyes is one of the members of the IBWAA, and we do all kinds of cool stuff. In fact, we have our own Hall of Fame voting that's going on right now. You can also find the stuff that I write. I'm a contributor for Forbes Sports Money, Baseball Prospectus, Off the Bench Baseball, and just at Epstein 1983 at Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, and at Blue Sky.
Yeah, absolutely. Go check that out. Sir, it was a blast talking to you again. It's been a while. I am wishing nothing but more ridiculous headlines from Brian Cashman for your future. But until then, thanks. Everybody, until then, just crapping on your own players. He's on a heater right now.
I thought we had a nice time here today, Javi. Man.
But guys, remember, go look forward to tomorrow's podcast. Can we talk with Stacey and Steve more about the Yankees specifically? And I don't know what I'm doing the rest of the week, but you will hear about it soon. Until next time, stay safe and of course, stay faithful. My Friar Faithful homies, take care.